I believe very strongly that architectural education should be classically based, hands down. I spotted the guy in the office who was doing all the awesome drawings and amazing work. And I said, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be. Architecture is first and foremost a visual art, which means that what it looks like matters. It's not just about talking about it. It's a very vulnerable position that we put ourselves in when we present our work. It doesn't necessarily get easier as you leave school and you're presenting for clients and for other architects and even colleagues. If you come into a presentation with excitement and a sense of adventure, it becomes infectious and people will gravitate towards the things that you're excited about and they'll focus on those things. It makes a big difference if you're excited, whether you're excited in the wrong way or excited in the right ways. It just makes a difference. You come off as a positive person.
What do you think separates students who thrive in critiques and those who struggle?
This is the hard thing because you want them to take it well, the criticism, but it's a vulnerable place and you've worked really hard and you really want encouragement. The worst thing you can do is ignore the criticism, but until we can truly show mastery of the art of architecture, we're gonna flounder as an industry.
Welcome to the Studio Session Podcast, The Art of the Critique, how to present, defend, and learn in reviews. We're pulling back the curtain on what goes through the jury's mind during a student architectural critique. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Chad Brown. Chad is a classically trained architect whose core belief is that great architecture is the culmination of all the visual arts. With over 18 years of experience spanning commercial, hospitality, residential, and ecclesiastical design, Chad brings a deep commitment to beauty, proportion, and craftsmanship. A graduate of the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, Chad furthered his classical training through the Beaux-Arts Academy and studying extensively in Florence and Rome. He currently serves as Director of Architectural Design at Edifice Design and Architecture, where he continues to elevate design through his seamless integration of art, detail, and purpose. Chad's passion is evident in every aspect of his work, from buildings to lighting, furniture, and beyond. His motto, the better it looks, the better it works. Welcome to the podcast, Chad.
Thank you, Ben.
Can you share a bit about your journey and the key aspects that have shaped who you are today?
So I was raised, my dad was in the Army, so that's kind of the only life I knew growing up. I was born in Kentucky. From there, I moved to Germany and moved around quite a bit. My dad was a chaplain in the Army. I was fortunate to see a ton of different cultures. I lived all over the United States, South Korea. I served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Haiti. I consider myself very well rounded in terms of my experience and cultural exposure. I remember my first architectural revelation or experience, if you will. I was probably about 5 years old, and we were living in Germany at the time. And in the small town that we were living in, there was a historic Rococo garden. A friend's mom had taken me and the friend to visit this garden, and being 5 years old, we were just running around the whole time. And we were playing hide and seek. And I remember it was a very formal garden. You'd go from one sort of area to the next, and they weren't walled, but they had tall hedges. And I remember running from one to the other, and I remember thinking, it's like I'm in a room, but I'm outside. And that didn't last very long because I just went and started running. But I do remember that experience quite vividly, of just thinking spatially for the first time, I think, or just realizing it anyways. So since then, it's, I've always wanted to do architecture. Yeah, growing up, I did live for quite a while in the South. My parents are from Florida. I went to grade school in North Carolina. I graduated from high school in North Carolina, and I graduated from college in North Carolina. So just the tradition and traditional architecture that was all around me. I don't know if it gave me a bias towards classical architecture, but I've always loved it. But in my family, there was no construction, architecture, none of that background at all. My dad grew up on a ranch, was going to become a veterinarian,
Mm.
and for some reason he became a chaplain. And so when I went to architecture school, I basically just said, okay, here I am. I didn't have any preconceived notions or anything, and I just showed up and learned what I could. Um, so, and I haven't looked back ever since.
Awesome. And how did you come to be in Utah and like start architecture working over here at Edifice?
When I graduated in North Carolina, I never thought I would live in Utah, to be honest. So when I graduated in North Carolina, I sent resumes all up and down the East Coast, and I did not get one reply whatsoever. Um, and then a woman at my church had a nephew in Utah who had just joined a firm and was becoming the managing partner. And they were at a family reunion, and she was, a very warm woman, very kind. She was talking and mentioned me and said, you got to give this guy a shot. She gave me his information. I contacted him and set up an interview. So I flew out to Utah. Um, and uh, when I when I was planning the trip to Utah, I was like, well, I'll just send some resumes out. And I sent a couple
Mm.
resumes out to different firms, and I got a hit on every one. So it was kind of a sign that it wasn't my qualifications, or it wasn't, but it just wasn't,
Mhm.
like, the East Coast wasn't the place for me at the time. And so I came out, interviewed, um, but I only got the one offer from uh,
Mm.
this woman's nephew, and I ended up working with him for over 15 years.
Awesome.
So,
What was kind of the focus of your work, and how did that become the fulfillment of your career?
so in the beginning, it was just like everybody else. It was just drafting, doing red lines. I made it pretty clear that I wanted to be a designer from the very beginning. I spotted the guy in the office who was doing all the awesome drawings and amazing work. And I said, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be. And I just kind of followed his lead in a lot of ways, and eventually started getting little design responsibilities and parts of projects. And then maybe 2 or 3 years in, um, our firm was chosen to do the Ogden Temple remodel in Ogden, Utah. I was lucky enough to be a part of that and a part of the design. And so I assisted the designer in that project and loved it and had a great time. Um, and interestingly enough, during that process, the designs we presented went forward, and they were brought back to us saying, this is great.
Mm.
We'd like it to have a little bit more classical influence. And at first we were like, what? Because going to school, we were told that classical architecture was a thing of the past, and it was stylistic, and that it really had kind of it was great for back then, but now was time for something new. So we were kind of disappointed. We started the process of redesign, and we there was a couple of people in the temple department who had classical training, and they came to our office during some of the meetings and just kind of gave us uh, a little bit of understanding of how to proportion a room, how to divide up the volume of the room, and also how to divide up the proportions of a wall. I was assisting and doing a lot of the modeling and whatnot. It was my responsibility to start doing those things, and as I did it, I noticed, oh, this is a little bit better. And the more I kept putting those principles into practice, I was like, oh, that looks better. Oh,
Mm.
there's a way to make it's not just arbitrary. We're not just picking numbers out of a hat, and saying, oh, maybe it's this tall or maybe it's that tall, but everything had a relationship, the parts to the whole. And things just started looking better to me. And then the ICAA had courses that would teach about proportions, the orders, how to draw the orders. So I was feverishly telling my boss, emailing him and saying, "Oh, there's this course that the ICAA is offering, and I would love to represent
Mm.
the firm at these classes." And so, you know, I kind of just nagged my way into going to them, and kept going and learning, and kept doing it. And so from then, I think after the Ogden Temple remodel, I don't think I've really worked on that many other types of projects. I've just worked on temples, which is basically a dream come true. I, for me spiritually, for me, academically, or, you know, as far as work goes, there's so many problems to solve, so many beautiful solutions to create. I've just enjoyed it, and that's basically what I've
Right.
done for the last 15 years.
When you attended the Beaux-Arts Academy, what were some of the main takeaways for you and why you recommend other students attend?
Well, at the time that the Beaux-Arts Academy came to Utah, they had an architecture program, and I was really trying to understand what the goals of architecture were. When I was in school, I had several experiences where it just felt like everything was arbitrary, and design was basically whatever you could explain away. And if you had a great conversation or if you had a great argument for it, didn't matter what it looked like, you were going to
Mhm.
do well if you could explain it or talk it through. I remember the first day of the Beaux-Arts Academy, Michael Georgievich was the professor there, and he was introducing himself and what he wanted to accomplish at the Beaux-Arts Academy and what we would be going through. I remember the first thing he said,
Mm.
architecture is first and foremost a visual art, which means that what it looks like matters. It's not just about talking about it. And when he
Mm.
said that, it just rang true, and I was like, I'm in the right place. I'm in the right place. Um, and so uh, the because my work, well, because working on temples is so spiritual to me and to lots of people, architecture has always been spiritual to me. And what I loved about the Beaux-Arts Academy, and specifically Michael Georgievich and the way he presented the classical, was that architecture itself comes about not
Mm.
because of man's need to provide shelter. So it's not the hut, but it's based on man's need to worship and for him to connect with what's beyond this life. And so um, just having that foundation and grounding, and that just that interwoven through everything that we discussed and that we saw and that we were taught, just resonated with me. And so it really opened my mind, my heart, to everything that was being taught and said. But added to that was the fact that, like I said, architecture is first and foremost a visual art. And so at the Beaux-Arts Academy, we were exposed to art, architecture, and sculpture. So we drew
Mhm.
for hours every week. We did some sculpting. And so it just reinforced this idea that architecture is an art. And when you're thinking about it as a visual art, you're taking different things from sculpture and from drawing and painting, and you're infusing them into the built environment and what architecture can do. And so to me, once I was able to see that, it took a long time for me to really see it and for it to click. Um, but once I saw that, I was like, oh, there are things that I can do in an artistic way that, a column, a pedestal, an entablature, they're going to help me accomplish those artistic goals that I'm trying to achieve with a certain project or whatnot. So I really came away from the Beaux-Arts Academy really for the first time having an idea of what I could accomplish with architecture.
Incredible lesson, and I'm really grateful that you had a chance to go to that. Like, I'm learning a lot through you.
Yeah, it was life changing for sure.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for it. I don't know that I deserved it. All I can say is thank you.
I love Michael Djordjevic. He taught a lot at U of U when I was, attending my first couple studios, and he was an amazing teacher. He knew every date for every building that exists, and
Hmm.
the architect that designed it, reason why it was designed the way it was. And I was
Yeah,
very impressed with his ability to answer all of our questions. And
at length.
yeah, and he gave fantastic advice, especially during reviews, which he attends frequently, as well as you. And um, I think that that's a good segue into our main topic, which is uh, discuss the art of the students can maybe look at the mind of someone that attends reviews and their final projects. And often students will face this trepidation and fear because it is the culmination of everything that, and sometimes they or experience negative thoughts into it. And it's kind of an overall. So without further ado, what is your internal dialogue when you first step up to a critique or review session?
So the internal dialogue, I guess I would say, is, you know, it's it's a very it's a very vulnerable position that we put ourselves in when we present our work. It doesn't necessarily get easier as you leave school and you're presenting for clients and for other architects and even colleagues. So it's a very vulnerable position to be in, to present. And so my my internal dialogue, I mean, the questions I'm asking myself continually are, what can I say that will address some of the concerns I have with the project that they're presenting, but also encourage them to be proud of what they've done, and but also want to improve. Sometimes there are people that, you know, it, it seems like they're happy with what they've done. They don't really want feedback. Um, and then there's others who crave feedback. Um, but really, it's just, how can I be effective in helping this person? That's what goes through my mind the most whenever they're presenting. I think to myself, as they're presenting, I think, okay, I see these issues. Which ones are important that I think, will benefit the project the most, and which ones can I frankly just, I don't need to bring up. But so I try to, also figure out what was important to that person. And a lot of times you can tell what's important to them because you see it in the presentation and they talk about it. You want to build that up, what's important to them. You want them to explore, because if they can explore something that's important to them, no one will have to direct them. They'll just keep going.
Mm.
I guess that's my internal dialogue the
Mhm.
most.
What motivates you to go out, drive an hour south and attend these jury reviews uh, pretty often?
I love what's happening at UVU. I don't think the students there realize how unique the program is there.
Mm.
Um, I, I, the program that I went to in North Carolina was very modern, um, and it left me confused in a lot of ways about what I could do with architecture. I believe very strongly that architectural education should be classically
Mm.
based, hands down. Once once you are once you've graduated and you've kind of quote unquote completed your education, I think there's plenty of room for experimentation for um, whatever you want to pursue stylistically or whatnot. But I think I just feel so strongly after having been to the Beaux-Arts Academy and just really gaining an understanding of what architecture can do through classical architecture. I just that's it's period for me
Mm.
that every architectural education should be classical, hands down. Any way that I can support and help with that, I'm happy to do. Um, and we are a business, so we're always looking for talent. I want to have that conversation in my work environment. I want to be able to talk through these classical principles. I don't want to have to defend or, you know, have any antagonistic feelings or whatnot when it comes to architecture. So in a lot of ways, I'm trying to expand the community, even pull it a little bit away from UVU
Mm.
and
Yeah.
spread it into the workforce. And so I go down there to find people that you feel a connection with work wise and architecturally, so that you can continue conversations and really build on top of that education. So there's several reasons, but those are the main ones.
I'm really grateful for your coming out to those. It's a big sacrifice of your time, and especially when you have a lot of work to do, and you're spending almost all day, and sometimes at these reviews. And our relationship started that way, and that's why I work with you at Edifice. And it's been a wonderful experience. And I do agree that the UVU program is very special, and it's very unique in the way that the teachers are so motivated to help you every step of the way. Not only that, but they're dedicated to building a program that's based in the Beaux Arts Academy method instead of the more contemporary or what is expected to be the modern uh, design strategies. And I think that UVU has an extreme value that they're providing their students, especially since they're one of the only classical based schools over in the West. What do you find most challenging about being a jury member?
As a jury member, you're sitting there with, you maybe five, maybe more peers. And so sometimes, you don't agree on what's the critique of somebody else, or they don't agree with your critique or whatnot. So that can be a challenge. Feeling like you're being understood by the person you're critiquing can be a challenge, because you don't want to come off as too soft or too hard. You want to come off with the right amount of intensity, if you will, whether that's for in a positive way or in a critical way. Critiquing somebody's work also is a vulnerable place in a lot of ways. Admittedly, it's much easier than doing all the work and putting it up there just for somebody who's seen it for 5 minutes to say, no, I don't think so. it's hard to know how to, you see a project or the presenter for, 5 minutes, and it's hard to connect with them so that they understand exactly the intention behind what you're saying. And so, you know, it can feel like it gets lost, or it can feel like it's been misinterpreted, or it can feel like it's it's like ineffective. And so there's there's a lot of challenges, but it's not. I mean, it's admittedly easier than presenting.
Mm.
But in terms of challenges, you just want to be effective in whatever you do. I think I think that's a universal thing. People want to be effective, and just, feeling effective, or feeling like you've you've called to attention things that are the most important, whether for good or for bad.
Mhm. What do you find helps you balance constructive criticism and encouragement?
I try to read the person who's presenting, and I try to read from their presentation the things that they're excited about. And so I try to find that thing that they're excited about. And if it's not readily apparent, or sometimes if it is readily apparent, I'll say, what was the funnest thing that you did, about this project, because um, I want to, encourage them to enjoy what they're doing, for one. So, um, finding that balance is really kind of finding what they're excited about. Um, because if they're not excited about something that I feel could get better, I might not I might not mention that, because I feel like if they're excited about something, no one's going to have to tell them to keep at it. They're just going to keep investigating and keep working, and keep trying to solve those problems. So if I can find something they're excited about, then I can focus on that and find a way to tie the thing that I see could change into the thing they're excited about,
Mm.
so that it feels like they can just build on that excitement by fixing this problem potentially. And so that's not always easy to do, but that's one of the ways that I try and help them kind of take the good with the bad.
Yeah, absolutely. My experience with you as a reviewer is that you're always giving positive feedback, as well as like showing students how to look at their project in a different way, and opening their eyes to some elements that are maybe not as distinctive to them because they haven't learned about that yet. And you're going where you're going down to where they are and helping them grow in their skills. And that's super encouraging. What is the biggest mistake students make in their presentations?
The biggest mistake students make, well, first thing is you can't compensate for a lacking presentation. A lot of times we spend so much time on the drawings and the work that we forget about the presentation method or quality or whatnot. But really, the first thing, the first advice I would give is that the presentation should speak for itself, for the most part. And in terms of mistakes that they make, one of the mistakes is feeling sorry for themselves and pointing out where they lack. Um, and so, if you come into a presentation feeling sorry for yourself and feeling like you haven't met the brief, um, then it's really easy for everybody else to feel sorry for you and feel like you haven't met the brief. And that,
Yeah.
um, but if you come into a presentation with excitement and a sense of adventure, it becomes infectious, and people will gravitate towards the things that you're excited about, and they'll focus on those things. There'll be some that say, well, you're focusing on the wrong thing, and that's potentially you are. You might be excited
Mhm.
about the wrong things and whatnot. It really it makes a big difference if you're excited, whether you're excited in the wrong way or excited in the right ways. It just makes a difference. You come off as a positive person. You come off as somebody who is um, engaging and friendly. And because when we come to reviews, we're not just coming to see what your building looks like. We're coming to see how you present and how you handle yourself, and how you engage with and talk about your project. And so the more excited you are, the more um, interested you are in what you're doing, then it comes off so much better. Even if your presentation is maybe lackluster, or it might not be the coolest one, or whatnot. But yeah, I think people coming feeling sorry for themselves, feeling kind of in a deficit.
Mm.
I've felt that so many times. Just focus on the beautiful things that you have done, especially if it's a mid critique, um, and just
Mm.
absorb what people are saying, and try not to take it too personally, but try to just learn from it.
That's great advice. As a graduate from UVU, some of the challenges that I faced when presenting was sometimes I would go up to a presentation and I would have uh, some of my graphics were hard to read from a distance away. Things present in a room where people are 10 feet, 15 feet, depending on how many people are there
Mm-hmm.
away from the project. And my advice is that when you start a project at the very beginning and you have, your room layouts in, and you have to kind of start thinking about early how you're going to present the project, and what that's going to look like in the end. And that helps you make a plan for what drawings you want to complete, as well as how it will be composed, and then what spaces you'll have left over for descriptive text. And that descriptive text always got me in the end. I was, especially like the room labels, they always were too small, and it made it so the reviewers didn't really understand the project because they weren't understanding which room was which is a vital process to help the jury, who is just barely got introduced to your project, understand where everything is and then give you feedback,
Yeah.
especially about adjacencies.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to read. Just even the drawings, sometimes the printouts, if it's a printed one, the lines are so faint that you can't read it at the distance that you are. So, kind of understanding where people are going to be observing your project from, and the distance and whatnot, is those are all good.
What is the best way for a student to respond to criticism in a review?
This is the hard thing, because you want them to take it well, the criticism, but it's a vulnerable place, and you've worked really hard, and you really want encouragement. The worst thing you can do is ignore the criticism and say, that's not really what I was focusing on," which may be valid, you know, but it really doesn't engage with the person. Um, I think that one thing that I think students should do is address the criticism. They don't have to solve it, they don't have to like it, but address the criticism. And you can ask questions and say, for clarification. You can say things like, could if it's something unclear, or if you want more explanation about it, just starting to engage the person giving the criticism really kind of gives them a chance to restate. You can restate it, and then they can say, yes, that's what I meant, or no, that's not. It's an excellent opportunity for a student to say, you know I would love to talk with you more about this afterwards. You
Mm-hmm.
start to create a relationship with professionals who are in the field. They can see that you took it well, that you're eager to learn, and that you're not afraid of the criticism. And everybody, it just calms everything down, because it's hard to say something that's unkind or that's critical of somebody's project, because we've all been
Mm-hmm.
there. But if you can engage with the person giving you the criticism in a non-defensive way, and address what their critique is. And if you can't, if you don't see it, or if you don't agree with it, you don't say that you don't agree, but you say something like, that's something I'll have to consider as I move forward. you know
Mhm.
that, thank you for letting me know, and that's something I'll have to consider. But just to say, well, I think it turned out the way I wanted it, and blah 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 blah. And it's like, it makes the juror feel like, why am I talking? What am I here for? If you've got it all figured
Yeah.
out, then
Yeah.
what's the point? And they'll stop giving feedback to people like that. um,
Right.
which has happened to me. And in the end, if I am ever in a jury with them again, I just let the other jurors comment, usually, because
Mhm.
there's no reason. There's no reason for me, because you'll see, especially if they treat the other jurors the way they've treated you, if they're, if they've taken it poorly, um, there's just no reason.
In a way, they're closing the door to future feedback if they're not addressing that concern.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if they don't engage and have an open mind, or are humble enough to just let it sit for a minute, because you don't have to show that you're this confident, I've got everything under control kind of thing. You
Mhm.
just accept the criticism, and
Move forward.
yeah, move forward. But just engage. Don't shut off. Don't shut off. It's easy to do, for sure, but if you want the best chance of creating relationships with professionals, and really coming across as somebody who's eager, anxious, and teachable, then you just engage, and try and just realize that it's not an attack on you personally, but
Yeah.
it's just a criticism. That the intention of that, and criticism of that criticism, is that the project gets better, and that you
Mhm.
understand a little bit more about what I see in your project.
What do you think separates students who thrive in critiques and those who struggle?
That's a good question. I think it's the level of engagement in their project. If you're engaged in your project and you have a level of confidence in your project, you thrive more in that situation, because really you're trying to solve problems when you're doing a design solution. It's all about problem solving. And if you have a good attitude about it, and you're excited about the project, you're going to thrive in the criticism, whether it's good or bad. That excitement is infectious, and the jury is going to engage with you in an exciting way, hopefully.
Mhm.
But those who don't thrive in a critique are those that probably were struggling before the critique came. And because it can be really confusing and really daunting to solve architectural problems, especially when
Mhm.
you're a student and things are so new and fresh. And it's like, okay, well, I have to make sure I have this checked off the list and that checked off the list. And you have a hard time, you know, understandably so, you don't have a great understanding of everything that you're trying to do. You're doing it for the first
Mhm.
time. And so those who struggle in the critique typically they're struggling in the project, because they're either confused, they're either intimidated, and the the critique really can compound that. And so that's
Mhm.
why it's important to try and offer positive feedback as well, so that they can say, oh, I am doing this part right, hopefully.
Yeah,
And then they can build on top of that success and broaden that through. That's the hope, anyways, that they can build on the success.
absolutely. When you were going through school, what were some kind of shaping experiences that you went through during your architectural reviews that changed the way you look at critiques?
Um, so I mean, I have a couple positive experiences and a couple terrible experiences. In my first year, we were just talking about sometimes you have no clue as to what you're doing. You're doing it for the first time.
Yeah.
So in my first year, it's kind of when you're doing more of the artistic stuff. You're not really designing buildings or anything, but you're experimenting with media and whatnot. So I had a professor, Michael Swisher, is a painter. And one of our first exercises was he asked us to take, I think it was 5 or 6 squares, like 3 of one size, 2 of another size, and then 1 of another size. There were black squares, and we had to arrange them on a white piece of 8.5 by 11 paper. And it was a figure ground study.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the first time I ever heard that term.
Right.
We didn't have Google and all of that stuff as readily available as it is now. So I couldn't just go in and say, go to YouTube and watch a video about figure ground
Mm.
and understand what it is. I remember sitting at home looking at this paper and moving these squares around. I had no clue. So I just kind of did a layout that I liked, that I thought looked good. The next day we were pinning them up, and it was just an informal pin up in class. But everybody was pinning it up. We were all new to the class. And so it's kind of intimidating because there's people with different backgrounds and different levels of experience.
Mm-hmm.
I remember pinning mine up, and it looked nothing like anybody else's.
Mm-hmm.
There was kind of, I wouldn't say a formula, but everybody had a similar look.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, they got it, and I didn't, because I was just, I was kind of devastated because I felt singled out because mine was completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember half-heartedly listening to the professor as he went through and talked through, called a couple kids up to say, okay, which one's yours? Tell me about it. After a couple had talked, he said, there's one up here that has balanced the figure ground correctly. And, I kind of picked my head up to look because I wanted to know which one it was. And he said, can anybody point it out? Some kid from the class went and pointed at mine,
Mm.
and he said, you're correct. And I didn't understand what I had done. I didn't quite understand what figure ground meant at that time, but I was like, okay, lucky break. But what it did for me was it made me okay with being different from everybody else and thinking differently. So sometimes if you present something different from everybody else's, don't discount it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, it really taught me that when push comes to shove, sometimes I can trust my gut,
Mm.
and I can just move forward, do the assignment, even if I think differently or it looks differently than other people's projects. Just move forward and just trust yourself. So that was my first year in architecture school, which I loved and ended up enjoying immensely. And then I get to my second year of architecture school, and this is when we're doing more of analyzing buildings and projects from famous architects that are doing amazing work. And so in my second year, the whole semester is we're analyzing a building that's assigned to us, and then we're creating a project based on that project. So mine was the Villa Dal
Mm.
Ava
Yeah.
in a suburb of Paris called St. Cloud, and it's by Rem Koolhaas and done in the early 90s. It is when corrugated metal was just beginning to be the thing.
Right.
Um, and so, corrugated metal, it used raw plywood, raw concrete, glass. It had a pool on the top, and the
Mm.
railing around the pool was the orange plastic construction fence.
Right.
And So if you look at it, you can really see a correlation between the Villa Savoye by Corbusier. It had ribbon windows, it had the pilotis,
Hmm.
although they were skewed.
Hmm.
So, you can see the reference to Corbusier. Um, and, in talking with my professor, I was trying to understand, okay, what is this about? It's weird. It uses raw plywood, and I was just trying to figure out what it was about. And so in the talks with my professor, he's like, "Oh, it's all about materiality and using materials that you normally wouldn't think of as chic, but they're he's making them chic by putting them in this building." So we made a model. I made a beautiful model. It was all about the materiality. And then it came time to design the project based on this. And the project what we had to design was a guardhouse.
Hmm.
And so in sort of response to this building about materiality, I decided to make the guardhouse luxe. So the house was using crappy materials, and I was like, okay, we're going to contrast this with a copper wall, and we're going to use light, and we're going to bounce it off some concrete. And, it was going to be this like sculptural thing. It was really cool, I thought. But, I go to present. And so all semester long, this building is about materiality. We're doing good. We've got a good project. It's about materiality and whatnot. So I get up there and I start explaining, this building is, it's in the suburbs of Paris, and these materials you wouldn't think of in a custom home, and all of these things. There was a juror there that I'd never met before, but he basically said, "That's a bunch of crap. This building isn't about materiality at all. This is about giving the middle finger to the upper class French suburb that it's positioned in, and saying, you know, the old stuff is done and the new stuff is here, and it looks different. It's more thoughtful. It's this and that." And I was kind of like taken aback because you know like this is the first time you're doing something like this, so you're like, okay. And then my professor that I'd been talking with all semester,
Mm.
he basically said, uh, he said, you know, he's right, Chad. And this was really,
Oh gosh.
this was really a missed opportunity on your part. And I think I just stood there stupefied, like
Yeah.
dumbfounded. I didn't have a response. I don't think I responded. I was so shocked. I felt isolated and betrayed and all these emotions. I think I was just silent. And I don't remember how I left the presentation. I was so confused, that I can put my trust in a professor, go throughout the whole semester gleaning his knowledge and all of these things that I thought, oh, I was like, okay, feed me, teach me,
Yeah.
let me know. Um, and then for something that somebody says at the last hour of this project could totally change the whole narrative of what's happening.
Mm.
And at that point, I thought I did not understand what architecture was. And I barely scraped, I kind of just scraped through the rest of my schooling, just relying on my own, um, just putting one foot in front of the other, basically, and trying to get through it. So I left architecture school really confused
Mm.
about what the purpose of architecture was.
Seems like the opposite of what school should be doing.
Exactly. So so when I go into a critique, what I really want to do is I want to reinforce what's being taught.
Yeah.
And so I want to, I read the briefs that are given before we get there. I review any of the project information that people that are attached to those briefs. But really, I want to support what is being taught. And I don't want to confuse or to kind of sidetrack where what their goals are in the schooling and what they're trying to accomplish. So, and that's why I really love being, participating with UVU, just because I believe in what they're doing so much. So,
How have critiques changed for the better, and how would you redesign the whole process if you could?
I think critiques are pretty much what they were when I was going through critiques. It's just the whole setup, pinning up, sitting maybe 5 to 10 feet away from in a row, the person standing there. I mean, it's basically the same thing.
Mhm.
I've thought a lot about how you could get a better result from critiques or a better outcome, how it could be more engaging, more fruitful, productive, or beneficial to the students. Um, and in a lot of ways, I feel like, I've thought, well, maybe if you give the student a client and they have a client the whole way,
Mhm.
and then that gets kind of stifling in a way because not everybody who's a great designer is great at interacting with a client. And sometimes in the architectural world, in the workforce, you can work for years and have never seen a client. You can
Mm.
be completely happy.
Yeah.
I worked for many years assisting the designer and not going to meetings and not interacting with the client, and I was super happy. The designer I was working with was my client, basically.
Mhm.
But so I thought, oh, we need to get the students clients. But really, that if a client doesn't understand architecture, and it can be a really kind of it can almost be more detrimental
Mhm.
to the learning process than actually just doing it without a client. Um, I've thought, oh, well, if you have visiting jurors that come at the very beginning when the project's being handed out, at the intermediate, like skis levels or the mid review, and then, just more interaction with the jurors, that could be helpful. But then, that's a lot of time for jurors. That's, which, if you can find somebody, that's great. But it also starts to create a relationship with the juror and um, the student that kind of blinds the juror to some of the parts of the project that they would call out otherwise. And so I think that, as far as I know, I think that the critique system is the way it is because I'm not saying it's the most efficient or the most effective, but sometimes having somebody come in who has no idea what's been going on, sees it for 5 minutes, it's an honest reaction. And
Yeah.
so it's hard to take that honest reaction. But I think there's really no other, I don't see a better way personally to do it, to get that raw, honest, intuitive feedback.
Mhm. Yeah, it's very brief, and you have a very visual experience as a critiquer to understand and only give that feedback maybe even 5 minutes, 2 minutes later after a presentation is done. And
Yeah.
that's why it's so important to bring a presentation that's well put together so you can present all your hard work in whatever that is, the 2 minutes or 5 minutes that you have
Hmm.
time to present.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your feedback on this podcast, Chad. It's been really awesome to uh, get your behind the scenes take on what an architecture uh, critique can look like from your perspective.
Well, thanks, Ben, for having me. Um, just like in a critique, the hope is that it's worth something and that it's helpful. And so I just, you know, just I would encourage people to love what they're doing, and if they love what they're doing, it'll show in their work, and everyone will be excited about it as well. So I love what you're doing, Ben. I think the podcast is um, just pretty amazing that
Thanks.
you have the initiative and are taking it on like this, because I think, you know, as you go through architecture school, there's so many things you don't understand, you don't know, you're seeing for the first time, and so having insight from multiple points of view about architecture school is super helpful. So congratulations.
I survived on YouTube University when I was in school, so I'm kind of giving back in a way.
For sure.
So, as a tradition on this podcast, we have the last guest give a question to the next guest. And your question is, what is your opinion on AI in architecture? And do you think it could be used in a productive manner?
Okay, so our AI has been in the last couple of years pretty hot topic, and we have in our firm we've talked many times about how we can use AI, because the sentiment basically is that, if you don't use it, you're going to be left behind, which it's definitely a possibility. Personally, I I feel like AI is a supplement. I know that a lot of people are using it as as content creation, and as you know, some people are using it as a tool, they say, but a lot of times you see a lot of AI out there, images that are being created for architecture, interior design, what have you. For me, I uh, I feel like, along with the classical education that I think architecture needs to embrace and teach, I feel like the development of skills, in terms of, and by skills I mean drawing, and being able to draw and communicate your intention. Um, I don't think AI can replace that at all.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, at the end of the day, when you present something, or when you have something that's AI, you know, you put in the prompt, but can you say that was something that was a product of you,
Mm-hmm.
in a way? And so for me, I I shudder to think that I couldn't produce my own work. Some people think totally differently. They think, why should I do it when this can do it for me?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but personally, there's so many levels I want to get to, so many skills I want to develop, that I don't even consider AI in my process.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's because I'm old and set in my ways, but I'd rather learn how to wash or render, um, than rely on AI to do some of that for me. I think what I noticed in architecture school and whatnot, and in the working world, was that a lot of times we let the technology limit us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and uh, like when you're modeling, for instance, in a certain program, there are limitations. If you just stop there, you haven't fulfilled it. You basically make an excuse saying, well, this program won't do that, so I can't express that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a pencil and you have your hand, you can pretty much recreate anything. It's been shown that you can do that. So, um, will AI be useful in architecture? A lot of people think it will be great for CDs
Mm-hmm.
and creating construction drawings and doing specs and all of those things, and it might be, um, but I'd rather have the confidence knowing that I can produce the work I can express the ideas that are in me.
Right. In a lot of ways, I feel like using AI will supplement the things that we don't like doing,
Yeah.
and we can t- reserve the things that we uh, love as architects to design, to methodically work out a problem, and to communicate with clients and understand their needs. All those things are kind of the art of architecture, especially the drawing process and articulating an idea into 3D space and communicate that to people as they experience the building. Those things I think are, you know, should be protected against AI in a lot of ways. And uh, let it do the CDs, let it do the detail work, make sure that everything's correct and can be built correctly. But that's in itself is art as well, how a building goes together and how effective documentation of a project can create a better overall project. And you can get creative in the way parts go together as well as are detailed. And it can be a beautiful drawing despite its apparent boringness, for lack of
Yeah.
a better word.
Yeah. No, it is an art form, putting CDs together and all of that. It my thing is that if you don't learn the skill yourself, if if you're without AI, what do you have to fall back on?
Yeah.
So that's my feeling. And I think that am I afraid AI is going to take over the industry? I'm not really afraid of that. I think we'll have a place, and I think clients will gravitate towards that, but they'll also gravitate towards other things. You have just diverse people, and
Mhm.
so I think having variety in the industry is great. And so even in architectural styles, if
Mhm.
you have a real modern take on something, I think that's great. But I don't think you can compensate for lack of skill with those things. So I think develop the skills, teach the skills in school, and then once you're out and flourishing, start to use whatever tools help you.
Yeah. What is your question for the next guest?
So something that's been on my mind lately is, we talk about an architectural education. And as you talk to educators and the things they want to implement, the thing that's been on my mind is sort of a multifaceted approach to the architectural education. When you look at past architects like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, there's Pietro de Cortona. They were all painters, they were all sculptors, they were all architects. Um, and do you ever think that we'll get to that point in architectural education? Will we get that whole foundation of artistic education in architecture
Mhm.
school? Teaching the skills of sculpting, teaching the skills of painting, not necessarily just for architectural renders or drawings, but will that ever come into architectural education as it previously was? Because nobody's even thinking about it right now. They're concerned about, do you have your mechanical in the building? Are you meeting code? Which are all important things. But really, I think that the profession has lost a lot of its credibility because the artistic element of architecture is leaving.
Mhm.
I think it's key to us gaining our credibility back as architects, because anybody can detail a dead end corridor
Mhm.
or alleviate a dead end corridor or find a route that doesn't include a dead end corridor. Anybody can calculate the number of exits you need and the distance they need to be apart,
Mhm.
you know. But until we can truly show mastery of the art of architecture, we're gonna flounder as an industry. Um, our credibility will, anyways.
That's an awesome question, and I totally agree. This has been an episode with Chad Brown, and it's been a pleasure.
Well, thanks, Ben. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. For those listening, you will want to catch us on our next episode where they answer Chad's question. I'm really grateful for Chad coming on. I hope that you found value from it. If you did, please like and subscribe and follow for more.